A grandmother saved some wolf cubs in a blizzard, and then the one whom everyone feared appeared. Why would an old woman living at the edge of the world become the mortal enemy of a man whom the entire taiga feared? This question had not yet been asked when the roar of an engine broke the monotonous howling of the blizzard. A single ray of light pierced through the white, blinding fog. It darted from side to side, snatching blackened cedar trunks and low-hanging fir branches heavy with snow from the snowy chaos. Behind the wheel of the snowmobile sat a man who looked more like a ghost. A white camouflage robe completely concealed his figure, blending him into the landscape. Only the dark spot of a carbine behind his shoulder betrayed his deadly intentions. It was Victor Orlov, a man whose nickname, the Beast, was whispered in the surrounding villages. He feared neither the cold, nor the authorities, nor the taiga itself. He had come here for a pack of wolves, weakened by the long winter, and a blizzard like this was just what he needed. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested to know where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. A few kilometers from here, on the very edge of the village, in a small house that seemed to be growing out of the ground, Anna Petrovna listened to the wind. The wind wasn't just howling, it was moaning, beating against the only window and scraping the roof like a giant beast. Her late husband, a gamekeeper, called this kind of wind widow's wind. Anna Petrovna was not afraid. She had lived here for almost 70 years and knew that it was pointless to fear the elements. You just had to do what you had to do. She threw on an old sheepskin coat and went out into the porch to fetch some firewood, and it was there, in the brief pause between two particularly fierce gusts of wind, that she heard it. A thin, almost indistinguishable cry coming from the old ravine behind her garden. It was not the howling of the wind or the creaking of trees. It was the voice of a living creature, a faint, desperate cry for help. Anna Petrovna's heart, accustomed to long loneliness, trembled. Anyone else in her place would have locked the door and thrown more logs on the stove. But she was the widow of a gamekeeper. She knew that the taiga forgives neither weakness nor indifference. Taking a heavy lantern, she stepped into the roaring darkness. The wind immediately hit her face with icy flakes, trying to knock her off her feet. The snow was deep and loose, and every step was difficult. She walked toward the sound, which appeared and disappeared in the cacophony of the blizzard. The ravine was almost completely hidden. Anna Petrovna shone the lantern, and the beam caught a small dark clearing under the roots of an uprooted fir tree. There, huddled together in a tight ball and trembling all over, lay 3 tiny creatures. Wolf cubs. Their eyes were still cloudy blue, and their fur resembled wet down. They were so small that they could easily fit into her old fur hat. One of them raised its head weakly and whimpered again, quietly and plaintively. It was obvious that their mother would not return. At that very moment, Victor Orlov stalled the engine at the other end of the ravine. His navigator showed that he had reached his destination. He had been following the wolf's trail for almost a day, and now he was there. The trail ended at a large snowdrift. Victor jumped off the snowmobile. His experienced eye immediately identified the location of the den. He pushed aside the snow and saw the body. The she-wolf, large, strong, but with a dark wound on her side. His shot the day before had hit its target after all. He smiled under his beard, but his joy was short-lived. The den was empty. He searched it, cursing under his breath. The pups' skins weren't worth much, but it was the principle of the thing. It was his prey. And then he noticed something that made his eyes narrow dangerously. Next to the wolf's tracks, already almost obscured by the blizzard, were others. Not animal tracks, human tracks, shallow indentations from felt boots. And they did not lead deeper into the forest, but toward the village, toward distant lights flickering in the blizzard. Victor's face froze. Someone had dared to take his trophy. Someone had decided to stand in his way. He looked toward the village, and his gaze became heavy as lead. Now he was hunting more than just an animal. He was hunting a human being. Anna Petrovna thought neither of the poachers nor of the danger. All she could see were 3 small, freezing lives. She took off her sheepskin coat, wrapped the trembling bundle in it, and pressing the precious load to her chest, set off on her way back. The walk back was even harder, but she kept going, stubbornly, step by step, shielding the wolf cubs from the wind with her body. When she got home, she put them in an old basin and placed it close to the warm stove. Then she took the goat's milk she had been saving for herself out of the closet and began to feed each of them a drop at a time from a pipette. At first, the cubs did not react. But then, feeling the warmth and food, they began to swallow greedily. Anna Petrovna looked at them, and her stern, weather-beaten face softened. She did not know that at that very moment, a few kilometers away, a man with dead eyes and a scar on his cheek was starting his snowmobile. He didn't go to the village. No, he was an experienced hunter. First, he had to study the area, understand who he was dealing with. He began to slowly circle the village, staying in the shadows of the forest, like a predator studying its prey before the final, decisive pounce. And he knew for sure that he would find what he was looking for. In this small world lost in the snow, no one could hide from Viktor Orlov. The blizzard subsided as suddenly as it had begun. By morning, the sky had cleared, and the frosty air became still and crisp. The village, buried in snowdrifts up to the roofs, seemed deserted. But life went on. Thin wisps of smoke rose from the chimneys, a dog barked lazily somewhere, and a door creaked. For Anna Petrovna, this silence was deceptive. She had hardly slept all night. Every rustle outside the window made her shudder. Her main concern now was the 3 little mouths to feed. The wolf cubs, having warmed up and grown a little stronger, began to show curiosity. They crawled out of their basin and clumsily, on their wobbly legs, explored the space around the stove. One, the largest, with a dark spot on his forehead, even tried to playfully bite Anna's old felt boot. She looked at them with a heavy heart. These were not puppies. These were children of the taiga, and her home was a golden cage for them. She knew that this could not go on for long. Viktor Orlov spent the night in an old winter hut a few kilometers from the village. He was in no hurry. Haste was the lot of amateurs. He slept in, ate some dried meat, and waited for dawn before getting back on his snowmobile. Now he wasn't hiding. He rode into the village slowly, with the dignity of a master. The roar of the engine echoed off the snow-covered houses, and curious, wary faces looked out of the windows at him. Victor stopped at the only store in the village, a low log building with a sign that read, "Groceries." He knew that places like this were the main source of information. Inside, it smelled of bread, tobacco, and burnt stove smoke. Behind the counter stood a heavy-set woman in a headscarf. Besides her, an elderly man was warming himself by the stove. Victor nodded to them, took off his heavy mittens, and asked for a pack of the cheapest cigarettes. "You've come a long way, my good man," said the saleswoman, looking at his scar and expensive winter clothes with undisguised curiosity. "Where are you from?" "I was driving from the allotment," Victor replied lazily. lighting a cigarette. His voice was low and hoarse. I waited out the blizzard. I thought I'd drive straight through, but I guess I took a wrong turn. What kind of village is this? It's in the middle of nowhere, sighed the man by the stove. A godforsaken place. There must be a lot of game around here, Victor asked casually. Do you hunt? What hunting? The saleswoman waved him off. Well, someone might shoot a hare. We're strict about that here. Stepan Ilyich, our gamekeeper, doesn't allow it. He's a good man, but strict. He doesn't like strangers. Victor smiled to himself. A gamekeeper. That was to be expected. But there was only one gamekeeper, and the village lived its own life. Are there any wolves? He asked, blowing out a ring of smoke. They say they're fierce this year. Of course there are, the man confirmed. A pack passed by last week. Ilyich saw the tracks himself. But who would go after them? They're worth more than their lives. Victor listened, occasionally interjecting. He learned that there were only 12 houses in the village. He learned who drank, who was sick, who had recently left for the city. And several times the name Anna Petrovna came up in conversation. She was the widow of the old gamekeeper Solovyov. She lived alone on the outskirts of the village, unsociable, living in her own world. Her husband, now deceased, was said to have understood the language of animals. Victor finished his cigarette, threw the butt into the ashtray, thanked his host, and left. Now he knew enough. An old woman, alone, on the edge of the village, the widow of a gamekeeper. It all fit together. Too many coincidences. He didn't hesitate for a second. It was her. He started the snowmobile and drove away from the village in the opposite direction, toward the house that stood alone at the edge of the forest. He didn't go too close, stopping 100 meters away at the edge of the trees, from where he could see the house clearly. And he waited. Meanwhile, Anna Petrovna was faced with a new problem. After eating, the wolf cubs began to make noise, quiet whimpers, and sometimes even attempts to howl. The sound was faint, but in the dead silence of the house, it seemed deafening. She turned on the old radio to mask it, but felt the icy ring of alarm tightening around her. Around noon, there was a knock at her door. Anna froze, her heart sinking. She ordered herself to calm down. It couldn't be him. Not so soon. She opened the door slightly. Standing on the threshold was Katya, a young woman from the house next door. Petrovna, hello? She chirped. Do you have any salt? My husband isn't going to town until the day after tomorrow, and we've run out. Come in, Katya. Anna tried to keep her voice steady. While she poured salt into a jar, Katya chattered away, sharing her news. Oh, Petrovna, you have no idea. There was a stranger in our store. He was a scary man, huge, with a beard and a scar on his face. He arrived on a snowmobile and said he was lost. But he kept asking about hunting and wolves. He had such a heavy look in his eyes. Our saleswoman, Aunt Masha, whispered that he was probably a poacher, or worse. He looked just like the man they talked about in the district center. They call him the Beast. They say he has a long history. Every word Katya said was like a hammer blow. Anna Petrovna stood with her back to the guest so she wouldn't see how pale she had become. The Beast. She had heard that nickname. She had heard it from her late husband. He said he wasn't a man, but a monster who would leave no witnesses. She gave Katya the jar of salt, said a quick goodbye, and bolted the door behind her. Then she went to the window and cautiously peeked out from behind the curtain toward the forest. And she saw him. He was standing where Victor had expected him to be, at the edge of the trees, a man in a camouflage robe. The distance was great, but she could clearly see his dark, motionless figure. He wasn't hiding. He was just standing there, looking at her house. It wasn't just a glance. It was an assessment, like a hunter looking at a cornered animal before delivering the final blow. Anna Petrovna understood. He knew everything, and he wasn't going to leave. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She was alone, trapped. And this man, this beast, slowly, without taking his eyes off her house, took a step forward. Viktor Orlov did not go back to his snowmobile. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a master walking on his own land, straight toward Anna Petrovna's house. Each of his steps on the crunchy snow echoed in the woman's ears like the beating of her heart. There was nowhere to run. Screaming was pointless. She knew she had to face him. Fear was what he was waiting for, and she would not give him that satisfaction. Quickly, but without fuss, she carried the sleepy wolf cubs from the basin to the hole bets, a small cellar under the kitchen where potatoes and pickles were stored. She covered the lid with a rug and placed a heavy stool on top. It wasn't very secure, but it was all she could do. She made it just in time. There was a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a knock, it was a bang, loud and forceful, delivered with the knuckles. Anna Petrovna exhaled, smoothed her apron, and went to open the door. He was standing there. Up close, Viktor Orlov was even bigger and scarier than he had seemed from a distance. The heavy, piercing gaze of his small dark eyes fixed on her. An old scar on his cheek made his smile permanent and sinister. He took off his hat, and the porch smelled of frost and the wild scent of the forest. "Hello, Mother," he croaked. His voice was deceptively calm. "Will you let me in to warm up? I'm looking for the road to Sosnovka. They say it's a shortcut through your place." Anna Petrovna silently stepped aside, letting him into the house. It was a game, and she accepted its rules. Closing the door in his face would have been signing her own death warrant. "Come in, you must be frozen," she said in an even voice. "But what do you mean, Sosnovka, my good man? It's a straight mile from here. You can't get through in winter." "Like this?" Viktor walked into the room, his heavy boots leaving wet footprints on the clean floor. He didn't take them off. It was a sign that he was not a guest here. They said there's a path. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of the room, slowly turning his head and looking around. His gaze was sharp, like that of a bird of prey. He lingered on every detail. The old icon in the corner, the photographs of her husband on the wall, the stove where the wolf cubs had been lying just yesterday. "Would you like some tea?" Anna Petrovna offered. Her voice did not waver. She knew she had to behave as naturally as possible. Like a simple old woman in a village who had been visited by a traveler. "I wouldn't say no to some tea," Viktor agreed, and his eyes lingered on the rug covering the trapdoor. He looked at it for a split second longer than he did at anything else. Anna Petrovna felt a lump rise in her throat. She turned toward the table to hide her face. Her hands didn't tremble as she took out the cups and the tea. She acted automatically, but her whole being was tense, like a string. She heard him walk across the room, the floorboard creaking under his weight. And then a quiet, barely audible squeak came from under the floor. One of the wolf cubs had woken up. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She knew that ears as sharp as his couldn't fail to pick it up. At that moment, as if awkwardly stumbling, she dropped the heavy metal teapot that was standing on the edge of the table with a crash. The sound was deafening. Viktor started and turned around. Oh, I'm getting old. My hands aren't what they used to be, Anna mumbled, bending down and picking up the kettle. She had gained a few seconds. It happens, Victor said evenly, but his gaze returned to the floor. He walked over to the stool and, without asking, kicked it away. Then he bent down and lifted the edge of the rug with his fingertips. Anna Petrovna froze, holding the kettle in her hands. Time stood still. She could see his broad back and tense shoulders. Now he would lift the lid, and it would all be over. But he didn't. He just looked at the cracks between the boards, straightened up, and covered the lid with the rug again. "Your floors are creaky, Mother," he said, turning to her. "Mice must be gnawing on them." "Those damn things," she agreed, feeling a cold sweat run down her back. "There's no getting rid of them." He drank his tea, quickly, burning his mouth in 3 big gulps. All this time he remained silent, while Anna Petrovna sat opposite him, not taking her eyes off him. It was a silent duel. When he had finished, he put the cup on the table, stood up, and headed for the door. The woman thought she had gotten away with it. But at the door, he stopped and turned around. "Listen, Mother," he said quietly, and there was no pretense of kindness in his voice. "I'm looking for my dog. She got lost in the blizzard. She's young and still foolish. She looks like a wolf. If you see her, don't take her in. It's not your business. She's a vicious dog. She might even bite the hand that feeds her. Do you understand me?" He didn't wait for an answer. He just looked her straight in the eye, and in that look was all his cruel, unyielding essence. Then he left and closed the door behind him. Anna Petrovna rushed to the window. He didn't drive toward Sosnovka. He turned his snowmobile around and drove back to that same winter hut in the forest. He hadn't left. He had simply retreated to prepare for a real attack. The woman realized that she had very little time left. She had to get to Stepan Ilyich. Only he could help her. She quickly threw on her sheepskin coat and stuffed a loaf of bread into her pocket. She had to go to the center of the village, to the gamekeeper's house. But when she opened the door, a gust of icy wind hit her in the face. The sky, which had been clear an hour ago, was now covered with heavy gray clouds. The first few snowflakes began to fall. A new blizzard was starting. It was even stronger and more vicious than the previous one. She looked at the darkening forest, where her enemy had disappeared, and at the white veil that was rapidly covering the world. The walls of her house were no longer a fortress. They were becoming a trap. Snow fell like a wall. In literally 10 minutes, the world outside the window disappeared, dissolving into a frantically swirling white haze. The wind was no longer just howling. It was roaring like a wounded bear, shaking the old house to its foundations. Anna Petrovna realized that going to Stepan Ilyich would be pure suicide. She wouldn't get 100 meters before she got lost and froze to death. Viktor Orlov knew this. He was counting on it. He had cornered her, using nature itself as his ally. Fear, cold and clammy, froze her for a moment. But then she looked at her husband's photograph on the wall. He was looking at her from the picture, young, strong, with a kind smile in his eyes. "Never give up, Anya," he had told her. "The taiga respects strength, not just in muscles, in spirit." And the fear receded, giving way to cold, clear rage. She would not be a sheep, meekly awaiting slaughter. Her home was her fortress, and she would defend it. First, she dragged the old oak chest where she kept her dowry to the door. It was incredibly heavy, and she moved it with great difficulty, straining her back. But now, to open the door, she needed superhuman strength. Then the window. The frame was old, and she knew that breaking it would be no problem for someone like Victor. She went to the shed and returned with a hammer and long nails. Tapping rhythmically and angrily, she nailed shut the only window facing the forest. It grew darker and even more oppressive, but she felt a little more confident. What else? She thought feverishly. She needed a weapon. Not a kitchen knife, that was ridiculous. Something that could stop him from a distance. And then she remembered. In the attic, in an old case, lay his rifle, an EZH-58 double-barreled shotgun, her husband's faithful companion on all his trips to the taiga. She hadn't held it since his death. The ladder to the attic creaked under her feet. In the cold, dusty, dry, grass-smelling twilight, she found it. The gun was heavy, the cold metal burning her fingers. She went downstairs, feeling an unfamiliar heaviness in her hands. Next to the gun, in the same niche, she found a tin box with cartridges. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. She hadn't touched it in 20 years. She struggled to break the barrel, as her husband had once taught her, and inserted 2 cartridges. The click of the gun closing sounded like a shot in the silence of the house. She was not a hunter, but she knew which trigger to pull. She sat down on a chair by the stove, placed the gun on her knees, and waited. At the same time, in a house in the center of the village, gamekeeper Stepan Ilyich was pacing nervously. He couldn't get the conversation with the shop assistant out of his head. The stranger, the snowmobile, the questions about wolves. It all added up to a very bad picture. He knew about Victor Orlov, not personally, but from reports and rumors. He knew that he worked dirty and cruel, and the fact that he had appeared on his land was a bad sign. He went to the phone, an old rotary dial, and dialed the Solovyov's number. Long, hopeless beeps. The line must be down because of the blizzard, he thought. But he couldn't shake his unease. He knew Anna Petrovna. He knew her stubborn nature and her compassion. And he knew that someone like her would stand in the way of a poacher. He went to the window and looked out at the raging blizzard. Even in his burin, it would be madness to venture outside now. He was trapped, just like her. And that helplessness angered him most of all. Time stretched into infinity for Anna Petrovna. She sat in the semi-darkness, listening to the howling wind. There was no sound from the basement. The wolf cubs, frightened by the noise, had fallen silent. Suddenly, the light went out. The old light bulb flickered and went out. The blizzard had broken the wires. Now the house was plunged into almost complete darkness, lit only by the faint glimmers of fire from the stove door. And in this new, thick silence, broken only by the howling wind, she heard it. A low rumbling sound that penetrated even the elements. The sound of a snowmobile engine. It was getting closer, slowly but surely. Anna Petrovna gripped the cold wood of the rifle stock more tightly. Her breathing became ragged. The sound grew louder. Now it was very close, right up against the walls of her house. And then it stopped abruptly. Silence fell. The most terrifying silence in the world. It lasted maybe a minute, maybe an eternity. She knew he was standing there, behind the door, a few meters away from her, deciding how to get in. She waited for the blow to the door, but the blow didn't come. There was a deafening crash, the sound of broken glass and the crunch of wood being broken. He didn't try to break down the door. He simply knocked out the frame of the boarded-up window with one powerful blow. A cold wind rushed into the house through the broken window, carrying with it a whirlwind of stinging snow. The fire in the stove flared up, momentarily illuminating the room and the dark, massive figure climbing over the windowsill. Victor Orlov was inside. He straightened up, shaking the snow off his clothes. In his hand, He held not a carbine, but a short, heavy crowbar, which he had used to break the window frame. He looked around the room, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw Anna Petrovna sitting on a chair, and he saw the gun on her lap. He smiled slowly and predatorily, baring his yellow teeth. The scar on his cheek curved, making his smile look like a snarl. "You're not so simple, old woman," he croaked, taking a step forward. "Decided to play war? Don't bother. I don't fight with women. I just break them. Give me the puppies, and I might let you live out your days." Anna Petrovna didn't answer. Silently, with both hands, she raised the heavy rifle and aimed the barrels at his chest. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from tension. She wasn't aiming. She was just holding it at him. The distance was no more than 5 meters. It was impossible to miss. "One more step," she said quietly, but her voice sounded surprisingly firm in the room. "And your rotten heart will have nothing left to ache for." Victor froze. He hadn't expected that. He saw fear in her eyes, but he saw something else too. Steel, cold determination. He was a hunter, and he knew that look. It was the look of a cornered animal that would fight to the last breath. He slowly raised his hands, showing his empty palms. The crowbar fell to the floor with a dull thud. "Quiet, quiet, Mother. Put that thing away. I'm not going to hurt you. Why do we need blood? I'm just taking what's mine. You understand? It's mine. I tracked them down. I shot their mother. They're mine by right." "Right?" Anna Petrovna smiled bitterly. "What right do you have, you monster? The right to kill? The right to profit from death? You have no right. Get out of my house." "I won't leave without them," he said slowly, very slowly, moving not forward but sideways, toward the wall, trying to get around her and come in from the side. "You think I'll believe you'll shoot? You, God's dandelion? You wouldn't dare." He was wrong. Anna Petrovna knew she had no other choice. She couldn't let him get any closer. She did what her husband had taught her to do to scare away bears. She didn't shoot him. She fired into the floor, right in front of his feet. The sound of the shot in the confined space was deafening. She was thrown back, the chair beneath her overturned. The acrid smell of gunpowder hit her nose. Victor jumped back against the wall, instinctively covering his face with his hand. In the floorboards, inches from his boot, was a black hole from which smoke curled. He looked at her, and for the first time in all this time, genuine animal fear flashed in his eyes. This old woman was crazy. She really was ready to shoot. Anna Petrovna, stunned, struggled to her feet. Her ears were ringing. She had one bullet left, and he knew it. Taking advantage of her confusion, he jumped. Not at her. He jumped toward the floor, kicked aside the rug, and yanked off the cover. A frightened squeal came from the dark hole. Victor roared triumphantly. "Aha! There you are, my beauties." He reached into the floor to pull out the wolves. And at that moment, something happened that no one could have foreseen. When he fired, Anna Petrovna didn't just fall. She hit the old bookcase standing by the stove with her back. A large clay jug of melted butter, which she had prepared the day before, swung from the top shelf and fell to the floor. The jug hit the edge of the stove and broke, spilling thick, slippery fat all over the floor, right in front of the crawl space. Victor, in his excitement, did not notice this and stepped right into the puddle of oil. His heavy boots slid forward as if on ice. He lost his balance, waved his arms, trying to hold on, but his massive body fell backward. He was falling, right onto the red-hot cast-iron stove. There was a wild, inhuman scream of pain and hissing, as if water had been splashed onto a red-hot frying pan. The smell of burnt skin and wool from his clothes filled the air. Victor rolled around on the floor, trying to knock the fire off his smoldering back, and howled in terrible pain. Anna Petrovna stood over him, clutching the rifle with a second cartridge in her hands. She could have ended it all right then and there. One shot, and the nightmare would be over. He lay before her, helpless, writhing in pain, no longer a beast, but simply a wounded, pitiful man. And she lowered the gun. She couldn't do it. She couldn't shoot a helpless man. It was beyond her strength. And at that moment, through the howling blizzard and Victor's moans, she heard a new sound, a powerful, growing roar that drowned out everything else. It was another snowmobile. It stopped right next to the house. A bright beam from a powerful flashlight burst through the broken window, and a figure in uniform appeared in the doorway. "Anna Petrovna!" cried Stepan Ilyitch's familiar voice. "Are you alive?" The end, Stepan Ilyitch struggled to climb through the broken window, his face tense and grim. He saw Victor writhing on the floor, Anna Petrovna with a rifle in her hands, and smelled the acrid smell of gunpowder and burnt flesh. The scene spoke louder than any words. "I knew it," he said hoarsely, approaching Orlov and forcefully twisting his arms behind his back. "I knew you were here, you bastard." Victor did not resist. The pain from the burns was too intense. The gamekeeper took plastic ties from his pocket and tied them tightly around the poacher's wrists. Then he looked up at Anna Petrovna. "I couldn't call, the line was cut," he said, his voice softening. "I felt something was wrong. As soon as the wind died down a little, I decided to make my way here. I did the right thing." He helped her sit down and took the rifle from her weak hands. Then he looked into the crawl space, where the frightened wolf cubs had huddled together. "So, this is what all the fuss is about." He shook his head, but there was no condemnation in his eyes. "Well, you're something else, Petrovna. You've got spirit. The late Ivan would be proud of you." What happened next was a blur. Stepan called for backup from the district center on his radio. Victor Orlov, moaning and cursing, was dragged away. His snowmobile remained standing outside Anna's house, a silent monument to the failed siege. Stepan helped Anna Petrovna tidy up the house and board up the window with plywood. They sat at the table drinking hot tea, and the woman finally gave way to tears. She cried not out of fear, but from the stress she had experienced and from the fact that it was all over. In the spring, when the taiga was dressed in fresh greenery and babbling streams ran through the ravines, the day of farewell came. The wolf cubs had grown and grown stronger. They were no longer clumsy puppies. The call of their blood, the instinct of their wild ancestors, had awakened in them. Keeping them any longer was both dangerous and wrong. One morning, Anna Petrovna and Stepan Ilyitch took them far into the forest, to the very heart of the wilderness, where no human foot had ever trod. Anna opened the cage. The wolf cubs hesitated, then came out, looking around suspiciously. Then the bravest one, the one with a spot on his forehead, yelped and ran into the thicket. The others followed him. They did not look back once. Anna Petrovna watched them for a long time, until their gray backs disappeared among the trees. "You did the right thing, Petrovna," Stepan said quietly, putting his hand on her shoulder. "You returned the taiga's children to it." She said nothing, only brushed away an unbidden tear. Much time has passed since then. Life in the village went on as usual. But sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, when Anna Petrovna sat on the porch of her house, she thought she heard a long howl coming from far away, from the depths of the forest. And in that howl she heard not a threat, but something else. Gratitude, and a promise that in this vast, harsh world, there is always room for compassion. What would you have done in Anna Petrovna's place at that moment, when the wounded poacher was lying at her feet?